Welcome back everyone to part 6 of the interaction system series. In this part, we will continue adding support for the hold interaction type by updating the widget. We will dynamically update the text of the widget to either say press or hold based on the interaction type of that actor. We will also add a sleek progress bar that tells the player how far along in their interaction they are. And not only that, but we'll also add the option to make the hold duration dynamic, so that individual actors can define their own duration. For example, the shield needs to be held for 2 seconds, while the sword needs to only be held for 1 second. And finally, we'll also update the button text in the widget that says press E or hold E to interact. We will be getting this value E from our actual input mapping, so that as we change the key bindings, the widget automatically updates. Alright, as you can tell, this part will make our widget incredibly dynamic and reusable and extend our system even further. So let's see how we're going to build that. Alright, so the first thing you want to do is open up our widget blueprint, which is in the interaction system folder called interaction widget. And if you recall, we just have a background color, a background blur on top of that color, and some text. So we want to make this widget configurable and usable for any different interaction type. So I'm going to add a progress bar that we're going to use for the hold type. So I'm going to search for progress bar here, and I'm going to add it below the blur, but after the background color, because I want the blur to also apply to the progress bar. So that's why I'm adding it like above the progress bar in this order, which means below it in this order. All right, and let's make it fill the entire overlay. And here's our progress bar. This is just its background. This is its foreground. Actually, I don't want it to have a background. We want the background to be just the background of the widget. So we're going to go to the background image here and draw as, change it to none. So this means it's hidden. And we're going to change the color of that fill image. So fill image here, where's the color? No, actually the color is not here. Yeah, it's here. So fill color and opacity. Let's do like 0R, 0.44G, 0.27. So it gives us like a nice dark greenish color. Let's see what this looks like by increasing the percent. Yeah, and you can see that the blur blurs the ending a bit, and I think that looks pretty cool. That's why I kept it below the blur. All right, so we have a progress bar now that we can move as we interact with hold to interact item. So to modify it dynamically, we need to make it a variable. So I'm going to go up here. It's already checked the is variable, so that's good. And I'm going to just rename it to hold progress bar. Or it's not just hold, maybe just call it interact progress bar. All right, and now we're going to go to our graph editor and add some logic here. So first thing we want to do is always default this progress to 0. So we get our progress bar, and on event construct here, we're going to set percent to 0. So regardless of the type, whether it's hold or press or anything else, the progress bar should always start with 0 when the widget is created. But then we also want to change the text here. So now it says press always by default. So we want to change this as well. So I'm going to also make this text a variable and call it the interact text. And to be able to change it based on the type, we need to know what the type is, right? So in here in our graph, I want to check if the type is hold, then do this. If it's not, do that. So to know what the type is, I'm going to pass it in as a variable. So in our variables here, I'm going to write interaction type. And this is going to be our enum that we created, e interaction type. All right. Now we have the variable, but it doesn't have any values. How do we give values to it? Well, first we want to make it instance editable and expose on spawn. That way we can pass this variable when we create the widget, when we spawn it. So I'm going to compile and go to where we do spawn this widget, which is our player interaction component. Render interaction widget over here. So right now there is no variable on it, but if I right click and say refresh node, because we just added it, now I can pass in the interaction type. And we can get this from our active interactable. So again, before rendering the widget, we check if there's any interactable in range. Like I said last time, there's a better check, which is to check if there's an active interactable that's valid. So I'm going to call our get active interactable function and do an is valid check on it. So if there is a valid active interactable, I'm going to get its interaction type. Let's move that over here. And then I'm going to pass that to my widget. Great. So now we just create the widget and pass the interaction type based on the active interactable. If there's no active interactable, we just render nothing or hide the widget. All right, so back in our widget here, now that we do have this active interactable, we want to set the text based on the interaction type. So I'm going to get my interaction type and do a switch on it. So again, if you remember, switch is like a branch that gives me if press, do this, if hold, do that. So I want to change the text. So I'm going to get the interaction text here. This is the reference to the text in the widget, and say set text. Oh, wrong one. Sorry. Set text, this one. So if it's press, we can do something. If it's hold, we can do something else. But actually, instead of a switch, there's a better way of doing it. Because with a switch, now I have to duplicate this. So once for hold, once for press, and I'm going to keep duplicating it for every other interaction type we add. It's going to get a bit messy. So there's another cool thing you can do, and I think I showed you this function before, so let me delete that. The text, there is a function called format text, which returns text here. And I can pass in variables, so I can say the action, so press, hold, whatever, we're going to call this action between curly brackets to make it a variable. So action to interact. So press to interact, hold to interact, whatever. And now to get this action, to have it a variable depending on the interaction type, I'm going to pull off and say select. And we want the select with this sign next to it. So the one at the very bottom, this one. And here I can pass in my interaction type as the index. And then it's going to tell me, okay, if it's press, what do you want the value to be? If it's hold, what do you want the value to be? But right now the value is a wildcard, meaning we haven't set it. So I can just, well, first break this, right click and change the pin type to text, because that's what we want to output. And then I can plug it back here. So if it's press, just write the word press. If it's hold, write the word hold, and so on. So this is much easier because next time I add a third one, I can just say, okay, if it's tap, write the word tap, and then it automatically replaces this word or whatever is between the curly brackets here with what I write. So if it's hold, it's going to say hold to interact. If it's press, it's going to say press to interact. And later on, we can even make that part to interact a variable. So instead of press to interact, or actually we also forgot the E. So press E to interact. We're going to make this E a variable later on. We're going to make this to interact a variable later on so that we can say, I don't know, tap X to open the door. And then this is going to be like a very dynamic piece of text. All right, and now the fun part. Now we want to move this progress bar when we press the interact button, and we want it to keep track of how far through our interaction are we. Now, there is two ways of doing it. I'm going to show you first the way that I'm not going to use, and I'm going to show you why I'm not using it. So if you recall, in our player interaction component, we have this event dispatcher that we dispatch when we are pressing the button. And it gives us how much time has passed in seconds, right? So we can use this. So in our widget here, I can get my owning player. And then this gives me a player controller. So then I can get controlled pawn from that. So this gives me the pawn. Then I can get component by class. Whoops, sorry, wrong one. Get component by class and get my player interaction component. Because I have all of these available in the widget. I have a reference to all of these things. And then from the player interaction component, I can do bind to on interaction press ongoing. So here, when this is pressed, I can now do a custom event and update the progress bar, set percentage to be whatever this value is. Sorry, divide, yeah. So why aren't I using this method? Well, the reason, if I do this here, I'm currently creating a dependency between the widget and the player interaction component. So the only way for the progress bar to update is if the owning player is using the player interaction component. But if anytime in the future I want to use this widget without the player interaction component, it's not going to work. So I'm going to make the widget be more generic and have the player interaction component the one that depends on the functionality of the widget. And let me explain. So I'm going to delete all of this, and I'm just going to create a function called set progress %. And this function takes as input the %, which is a float value between 0 and 1. All right, and it's going to get our interact progress bar and set its percentage. All right, so this means that the widget provides a function to set the % and doesn't care how the person using it is going to set it. So it makes no assumption on the user of the widget, which means it's decoupled from its owning player or decoupled from the player interaction component. But the player interaction component knows about the widget because the player interaction component creates this widget. So then the player interaction component can make assumptions on what exists within it. So it's a better way of doing it and makes the widget much more reusable. So to be able to update the percentage, we first need to make this widget a variable to be able to call this set % function that we created. So right here, after we create our widget, let's move these things and let's promote this to a variable. So right click, promote to variable, and call it the interaction widget ref short for reference. All right. And now that we have this, we can call set % anywhere we want. But of course, we're not going to call it here. We're going to call it when we actually update the percentage, which is what we do in our event graph right here. So if the interaction type is hold, we do all of this good stuff. So right here, before the branch, even before we check anything, we want to get a reference to our interaction widget. And I'm going to right click and change to validated get. This means first make sure it's valid before getting. It's always good to make sure these things are valid in case they're not. And if it is valid, then we're going to call set progress %, which is the function we just created. And if it's not valid, let's just jump forward to this other branch. So just don't set the %, but do everything else. And the % here is going to be the elapsed time divided by 1. And remember, 1 is just a default hold duration that we're using now. We're going to make this a variable later on, and this variable will be provided by the interface or by the interactable actor. But for now, it's just 1 as a default. All right, so right now, the widget sets the percentage to 0. Sets the text based on the interaction type, and provides a function to update the progress bar, but doesn't update it itself. The player interaction component is what will update the progress bar. All right, let's see how this looks like. So now if I go to this, it's going to say press to interact, and this is going to say hold to interact. See, this one is a press, this one is a hold. So if I hold now, great. It updates, but I let go, and it didn't go back to 0. But if I start pressing again, it's going to start from the beginning. But when I let go, it doesn't go back to 0. So let's see how we're going to fix this. It's quite simple, actually. Right, the reason this is happening is because we set the percentage when we're pressing the interaction ongoing, which I actually want to rename to just interaction ongoing to not confuse it with the event dispatcher name. But we never set it back to 0 if we stop pressing the button and we didn't reach the 1 second. So basically here we also want to set it to 0. So I'm going to get a reference to my widgets and just say set progress %0. So now if I play and I hold and let go, perfect. Now it goes back to the beginning as soon as I let go of the key. And if I reach the end, perfect, it interacts. So I can also show you what it looks like with 2 hold to interacts next to each other. So I'm going to change this to hold as well. So now they both say hold. And if I finish interacting with this one, then this one starts from 0 again. All right, very nice. Now we have a widget that supports both the press and hold to interact. Now, one thing I told you we're going to do as well is change this 1 second to be a variable. So to do that, we're also going to add it on our widget. So in the BPI interactable, since we have a function to get the interaction type, let's also add a function that gets the hold duration. And obviously this function will only be implemented if the type is hold. So I'm going to add a function and call it get hold duration. So how long the input has to be held for. And it's going to return a duration, which is a float value. Obviously, if a class implements sets the interaction type to press and not hold, then they don't have to implement this function. All right, so now let's go to our interactables and let's go to our pickup item, because the pickup item can be either hold or press. And under the interfaces, the get hold duration, let's change it to, I don't know, 1 or 2 seconds. And again, this you can make a variable like we did for the interaction type. So promote to variable, call it hold duration. And if we click the eye icon to make it instance editable, also expose on spawn is a good idea. Now we can provide this as a dynamic value per instance. So now for my shield, I can say the hold duration is 2 seconds, while the sword, the hold duration is 1 second. So now I'm configuring it, and the door doesn't have it because we didn't set that variable on the door, and we said it's always going to be press. Now we want to use this variable. So over here in our player interaction component, we want to replace all these ones with the hold duration. And of course, the hold duration, we get it from the active interactable. So let's move these things a bit here and then get our active interactable, which is a function that we call. And I'm pretty sure it's valid, but again, always good to do a validation check. Is valid. And if it is valid, we want to get the hold duration. All right. So now we have it, and we can replace all of our static ones with this one. So this will be our hold duration, and this one as well. All right, this looks good. And let's see now if it works. I'm gonna play, go to my sword, should be just 1 second. Yes, and this should be 2 seconds. Yeah, very good. So you saw that it was significantly longer to interact with the shield than with the door. Nice. And of course, you can change the default value of this to start at whatever value you want. Very nice. All right, and the last thing I want to do is also change this E, because again, this E is hard-coded. Here, we always say press E to interact, but if we change the key binding, this won't be correct. So I want to change this to be the actual key binding. Let me show you the third-person character to just show you one thing. So in the third-person character here, we use this enhanced input local player subsystem. This is what we add the mapping context to. And we can use this to also query a specific action. So you can say query map to action, or query map to action. Give it an action, like the IA interact, and it's going to give you back all of the inputs that are mapped to it. And if we get the first one, and then we can get the name from this key by calling get key display name. So we're going to use all of this. So actually, let me just copy this. I don't know what that is. So we're going to use this, but in our widget. And remember, this exists on the player controller, which in our widget we also have access to. So let me move this a bit. So in the widget, if you say get owning player, this will always return the player controller. And then I'm going to paste all the things that we got here. And then just plug this. We have to get the enhanced input local player subsystem. All right. So now we got our owning player, get our subsystem. Let me move that here. And we get the key and its name. Now we want to pass this name instead of E. So we're going to do the same thing. So it's a format text node. I'm just going to replace this E with open, close curly brackets and call it the key name. Now we have another variable for key name that we can just plug in here. I love this format text node, really. All right, so now we shouldn't see anything different. So it should still say E. Yeah, so now it says E. But if I go to my input mapping context and change this from E to, I don't know, X. Now if I go here, it says press X. Nice. And of course, I'm just going to go back to E for now. Excellent. Hold E, press E. Nice. And that is really, now we have a dynamic widget that supports different interaction types and gets the key dynamically. Next thing is also to interact. We can make this a variable as well, defined by the interactor, but I'm going to leave that for a later part. I think for now, we're pretty good. All right, and with these changes, we now have the foundations of a very modular interaction system. In the next parts, I will be showing you how to extend this system by adding new actors to interact with, like an NPC to talk to, and adding new interaction types, like tap 4 times to interact. And we'll just keep adding more and more to the system to show you how you can easily extend it for any of your own purposes. And of course, if you want to download the full project files of this system and see the other benefits I offer, check out my Patreon page to see all the perks. As always, thank you for watching, and I will see you in the next one. Hey, it's video's over. What are you still doing here? Really, it's over. Nothing's gonna happen. I'm not sure what you're expecting. Chloe, can't do that on camera. Yeah.